Welcome all. Thank you for taking the time at the end of the day for this very special panel that we have for women in STEM. Um, we're going to be turning it over to the panel. Sarah Stockwell from the Gordon Institute will be introducing it, but I thought I would just give a quick background for why we're doing this seminar. So Tufts University does not have a business school, but it does have the Gordon Institute, which is the locus for all the innovation, entrepreneurship, leadership, and management programs at the university. More importantly, the reason that Tufts does not have a business school is that from the Tufts point of view, our mission in life is to put into the world what we call transformative leaders with heart. These are people who are deeply empathetic to the social society issues, but also have the insight and wisdom from a business and technology perspective to be able to have impact in the world because they also have the leadership skills to be able to persuade, negotiate, and lead others. And from my perspective, one of the most important things you can do when you're creating an innovative world is create an innovative team. And innovative teams are the most diverse teams because through diversity and being inclusive as many perspectives as possible, you maximize the probability that you'll come up with the best answers, the best solutions to any challenge that you may face in the world. So to us, it's not just a business imperative to create diversity in the workplace and in the world. It's an imperative for society because diversity is not only the right thing from a justice point of view, it's the right thing from a society point of view for the maximization of creativity. So today's panel, I find a particularly exciting opportunity because you get to meet people who are living that environment today. And we hope that through this panel, you'll gain some new insights into how increasing the diversity of your own populations can increase the innovation and the entrepreneurship and the creativity of your organizations. So thanks for joining today. And with that, let me turn it over to Sarah Stockwell, who is actually one of our faculty members at the Gordon Institute, and she'll be introducing the panelists and also our panel moderator. Sarah?
Thanks, Kevin. And actually, I'm going to pass it directly to Elaine, who is our new director of the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center and a Cummings Family Professor of the Practice in Entrepreneurship. Welcome, Elaine. We're so pleased to have you here, and thanks for hosting this panel today.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, I'm relatively new to Tufts. I've spent almost 30 years in tech. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I did 6 startups and small companies. And I've spent almost 10 years teaching entrepreneurship at MIT prior to Tufts. Coming up as a woman in robotics, I've seen the world of women in STEM from the front seat. And I think it's pretty clear that tech has a long way to go to get to the point where we really have diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But we are making progress. That's why I'm very, very excited to introduce our rockstar panels who are all thought leaders in this very important area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on our panels to spend like maybe 3 minutes with a quick personal introduction about tell us a little bit about your story and what experiences, if any, led you to focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging in your career. Starting with Ingrid Jacobs. Ingrid is the VP and Chief Diversity Officer of Eaton, Vance. And she has a wealth of experience in HR in established companies like Bank of America, GE Aviation, Whirlpool, and Raytheon. Ingrid?
Sure. Sometimes when you go through those names, I'm like, oh yeah, I did work there. It's been a while and it's been a great run. So I've been doing diversity work for years. Previous to that, I was doing HR work, executive recruiter. I was also doing university relations manager, learning facilitator, HR VP, things of that nature. So I've been steeped in HR, but also definitely have leaning into the business side and make it my priority when joining firms to really learn how the business makes money, how it loses money, what competitors are doing, to see around corners to help leverage diversity and inclusion to be embedded, not just a human capital side of the house, meaning what are we doing from our people management, but also that piece that talks about what are we doing from driving revenue and expense reduction, things like that. So I'm passionate about this work because I get to do what I love every day. I also am humbled by this work because I learned something new where I honestly say out loud, wow, I didn't know that, or that's surprising, look at me. Something has come up that I was unaware of, and I love that part of the work too. So with that, I'll hand it over to our next person.
I guess I'm going to call on Vanessa Spatafora, Senior Program Manager of Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging at DraftKings. And who's our co-host for this event? Vanessa?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Vanessa Spatafora. As Elaine mentioned, I'm the Senior Program Manager of Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging at DraftKings. I've been with DraftKings just over a year and a half now. It's been a really amazing, transformative period for the organization, going from, Boston tech company, North American tech company, global tech company, B2C tech company, B2B tech company, full enterprise. So there have been a lot of really amazing opportunities there to kind of be in on the ground floor of an organization who wants to be really thoughtful and intentional about the way in which we're ensuring an inclusive culture for our employees, the way in which we're building an inclusive organization, and also the way in which we're leveraging this platform that we've built and that has a huge footprint both in tech, in sports, in entertainment, across the board, across the geographies, to ensure that whatever we're doing internally is also being reflected for our customers. For me personally, it's been a really amazing experience within this tech environment to be able to leverage data and really bring to light that, very much so along Kevin's earlier remarks, that this is a great to have, this is the right thing to do, but how do we drive the business out of it, right? How do we ensure that we're being intentional in our efforts, because there's so much work to be done, really focusing in on where we're seeing stories told through the data and being sure that the entire organization is coming along for that journey. And it's not just, a few people over in the HR side. This really is an all-in effort. Everyone in the business can take ownership, can play a role, can affect change. And really, I see kind of our job as helping people better understand what that role is, where they plug in, and ways that it kind of connects to the bigger picture, and how we're actually seeing progress through the data, through the engagement, and through efforts like this.
Awesome, thank you. I'd like to call on Guy Pacitti next. Guy is the global leader of diversity and inclusion of Pegasystems, and prior to that, he was director of diversity and inclusion at IBM. Do you see the same themes in terms of doing good by doing well, that diversity and inclusion has kind of a business bent across all those experiences too?
Yeah, I do, Elaine. And what my fellow panelists have mentioned, I totally agree with. And I come into this work from an HR background, having been many years as a business partner. And then about 5 years I spent doing executive succession planning. A really big part of the work that I did in that category was focused on identifying diverse talent for critical leadership positions in a large-scale enterprise. And a big part of that was growing their skill set to be able to take on those roles. So that bled into, and that led me to doing work in diversity and inclusion, where I was responsible for diversity and inclusion learning, as well as career accelerator programs for underserved talent. So one of the things that's really interesting to me about the work that I do and the work that we do is the opportunity to really meet people where they are. And what I mean by that is I think there are a lot of colleagues that we have in our respective workplaces that are very well-intentioned, but don't know where they are on this journey. They don't know where they are on the scale of inclusion. And without inclusion, we can have diverse populations, but those diverse populations alone do not achieve the problems that do not solve the problems that we're trying to solve. They don't kick up the innovation. They don't kick up the decision making and ultimately the business productivity unless they go hand in hand. So the part of this that I really enjoy is connecting with people where they are on their personal journey and helping to enlighten them.
Awesome, thank you. So Ashley Ladd, Manager of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Hubspot. Now, this is interesting because HubSpot is a relatively new public company. So I wonder whether or not the challenges you see there is the same or different than more established companies like IBM or Eaton, Vance or Raytheon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elaine. I think there are always going to be challenges in this space. And so as I come in, and I think regardless of whether the company is 20 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old, we all kind of, there are common themes for each, I think, organization that folks really need to work on. And I feel like diversity is something that was kind of the buzzword and the big kind of focal point of a lot of folks' efforts early on. And I think the inclusion, belonging, and equity piece has come second. And I think, unfortunately, we got it wrong. I think everyone got it wrong. So I think what we're really trying to emphasize and focus on is that we can't have a thriving, diverse culture if we don't have the inclusion and belonging piece really well orchestrated within our culture. Like, we need everyone to feel like they belong when they hop on Zoom, when they walk through our doors. And so for us, that is really something that we're working on even more so now in this pandemic world, honestly, and especially being a global company. How do we make people feel like they belong through a computer screen, right? There's so many new sets of challenges that come up in this world that we're in. And so the journey, like Guy said, is a winding road. It's always going to be there. So I think the challenges are just getting more nuanced as we continue to grow as an organization.
Awesome. So last but not least, Kiera Penpeci, founder and principal consultant of Prime OD. Now, you have so much experience consulting for best practices in DEI and belonging. So what brought you to this area of expertise, and what do you see in the field?
So this work is really, really personal for me, just, being, I call myself a triple minority. So I got into this work because of, my personal experience. So I have a background in organizational psychology. And so I've been on a path toward doing that work, which is really broad over the past 10 years. And so recently, hadn't learned a name for it, learned that, DEI is what we call within organizations. So, through my education, I was working full-time also, in tech companies and nonprofits, and, found myself really being the person who was paying attention to the voice of employees and, finding ways to raise what challenges that they were speaking to and serving that up to leadership. Or, because I was, a generalist, I was, looking at our benefits and, looking at our events and our programming and all those things, was able to influence the decisions that we were making, in our people practices, based on the employee voice. So, that's what I'm seeing. What I, a few of you mentioned kind of, the kind of changing complexity of this work. And, as organizations become more diverse, they do get more complex. But, one thing that I think that we should all learn, considering, that we're aware of the best practices, is being more proactive about, what employees need to feel successful and to feel like they can thrive. So I see that becoming more sharpened as we go, as this role, as this work becomes, more and more, as it becomes more of a solid foundation in organizations, at the top of priorities. I see us becoming more and more proactive about it.
Perfect. Now, a few of you mentioned the difference between diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. It seems like, the correct way of referring to this work is changing and continues to change over time. Can some of you just define the terms for us? Like, what is the correct way to describe this whole concept, and what does each of the component words mean? All right, I'm gonna have to name names. Vanessa.
I can.
Yeah. So I think, I don't think there is a right way, right? But I think it's more the philosophy, the mission of, your strategy and your program, what people are really focusing in on. I think a few people, touched on something that's very near and dear to me, which is that this idea that diversity alone, bringing more representation across the board into an organization, is not going to solve for the challenges that we see, whether it's the business outcome, whether it's the culture, whether it's the sense of belonging, all of those things. And for me, I think, you know, that rings really true throughout the experiences that I've had in my own career, throughout the things that I've seen in other organizations. And I think the emergence of the idea of equity really does speak to the systemic root causes of some of these challenges, right? And without recognizing that people experience an organization differently by virtue of their identity, by virtue of the way they show up, their cognitive difference, right? Their communication style, all of these things. But certainly we know that if you have, you know, difference in identity, especially visible one, gender, race, ethnicity, things like that, you're going to necessarily experience the world, society, your workplace, the work you do differently because it's informed by your unique experiences and things like that. So the equity, the systemic piece for me was always really important. And I love seeing more and more organizations adopt it. The way that we kind of break down, you had mentioned, what do all these different terms mean? We call it inclusion, equity, and belonging at DraftKings. And the way that we've broken that down is inclusion's our culture. Equity is moving through or progressing through that culture with parity and, you know, access to opportunity, a level playing field, if you will. And then belonging is that individual sense that you can come into the workplace, you know that those two pieces are going to be working in concert to ensure that you're able to show up, whether it's in a brainstorming session or in your review where you need to self-advocate and things like that, where you can just show up, be yourself, and know that that's going to be something that's received and not just kind of, I don't know, questioned or dismissed or, you know, not experienced by the dominant majority, so therefore not real, like we've seen in a lot of organizations, right? I think that sense of belonging individually goes a really long way for people, but without those systems and cultures in place, there's only so much an individual can do, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what it is for me, though. I'm curious to hear from others.
Yeah, I can build off that a little bit as well. I recently took a inclusion by design. It was basically a training for my team and for a bunch of our people and managers at Hubspot. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this analogy, but like diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is when you're asked to dance. Belonging is when you can dance like nobody's watching. And they actually in the training, they talked about equity being like being able to be the DJ or pick the playlist. And so I loved kind of that additional piece of it. And I think equity is kind of in that underlying, is the underlying kind of current of all of these DIMB kind of very large missions and goals. And it's something that I think is super important and sometimes gets left out of the equation at times. And I think something that I think about a lot is, and equating it back to just, we've all been at home and getting a lot of packages recently. And, you know, when you buy something online and it looks really good in your computer screen or on your phone, and then you get it in person and it's not as great as you thought it was going to be. I feel like if you have that diverse culture, but you share about it and you're like, this is really the place for you. This is really how, this is where you should be. And then folks get there and they don't feel like they belong in that culture. Kind of the same feeling. And nobody really loves that feeling. And so I think you have to kind of walk the walk before you talk the talk. And I think that's something that we're really taking incredibly seriously. We would prefer to have our employees be able to speak for that, as opposed to us, you know, putting out messages around what great work we're doing without having, you know, the employees themselves being able to really be our advocates in that way.
Do you guys have like a specific story to tell about like how somebody might come in feeling like they're a little bit unsure, do they belong? And then what experiences might they experience that makes them feel included and makes them feel like there is equity and, you know, makes them feel like they belong to your organization, like a specific story?
I guess I can share a little bit of my story because I'll never know, how someone else experienced, entering into an organization. But I started at a tech company some time ago, and I had a lot of experience in, white majority companies. But for some reason, this company, because my team was so large and I was the only Black woman, I think I was the only person who identified as LGBT also on the whole team. I felt for the first time, that I was I felt the opposite of belonging. I felt like the oddball, the odd one out. And, you know, I was kind of on my own first time experiencing that, didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. And so what I did find was that there was an internal community that I could turn to, and it was kind of buried. We weren't really talking about it, but it was a Black ERG, so Employee Resource Group or Affinity Group. And, I joined that group and, we were a global company. And so to see, all the Black people, in this one, it was, mostly it was a Slack group for the most part, because that's how we could communicate, across regions. But, there I could, talk about what I was experiencing and, be candid about it. And that kind of encouraged me to create more community within the organization. So I ended up starting an LGBTQ group, and saw others having the same kind of connection. Even people who were starting. It was great to see them, be able to identify, find a group to identify with. But even folks who had been with the company for a while were making comments about, this is the most I've ever spoken in a meeting at this company. And we had some people who were, transitioning, who felt confident enough to do it, to be open about it and talking about it and announcing it. So, I think that's why, these programs are really important. And I think those are why, I loved Ashley's point earlier about, you have to kind of walk the talk, and, you can show externally like how, all these things that you're doing, but when you walk in the door, those things have to be like, if that Black ERG had been shown to me in the first, few months that I had been there, I might not have felt, lack of belonging. But it's the things that we're doing internally, that are intentional, that are proactive to influence people's experience.
So Guy, you had mentioned earlier on that you have to meet people where they are, and sometimes they don't really know that they aren't where they ought to be. Do you have a story to tell about that?
Well, I actually have a personal story about myself. About 2 years ago, I was in Manhattan for a meeting that I was running as a director of diversity and inclusion. The traffic was horrible, and I thought it's probably a better idea to jump on the subway rather than to risk getting into this traffic. And I didn't know the subway, so I jumped on the subway, with the expectation that I'll figure it out. And I didn't want to miss my stop. So I thought it's probably a good idea to ask someone if my stop, the next stop, is mine, 42nd Street. So it was crowded as it is at rush hour. I couldn't see that legend above the door. So I thought, let me ask somebody. The gentleman right in front of me was probably 21. He's appeared to be somebody that we would, refer to as goth, with over-dyed black hair, black fingernails. And I looked at the woman next to him, and she had a Starbucks. She looked like she was going to the office. She was much closer to my age. So I moved down and asked her if the next stop was 42nd Street. And then as soon as I did, I realized, look what you just did. I went to my own comfort space. It wasn't about capacity. It wasn't about knowing about the next stop, whether it was 42nd Street or not. For all I knew, he could have been a native New Yorker and she could have been a visitor just like me. So kind of meeting people where they are, having that discovery, that was my personal discovery of my own biases. And I think kind of that enlightenment is really what gives me energy, helping people to have similar experiences like that.
I love
If you don't mind, oh, I'm sorry, I was going to just add to that and just say
Yes.
from a working with leaders, sometimes it's really important to give them a safe space. There's times when I'm imagining with some of the folks on the phone, we've had to just kind of find out what's the comfort level and readiness level for a person as they're trying to understand where they are on their own diversity journey, kind of adding to Guy's point, and just also pushing them, because ultimately we can't really move the needle if people keep operating in that safe zone, a space where it's like, well, I'm uncomfortable. I mean, I can't, I'm guessing everybody on this panel has had this conversation many times where the person says, but that's uncomfortable, or I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that. Is that okay? Like there's a lot of permissioning that goes back and forth in this process. And when you are working with leaders, and not just like senior leaders, managers, folks that are doing this work, maybe with an ERG and trying to influence others, there's a lot of a big push to everybody wants change now. But as soon as you say you, and you have to go do something. And oh, by the way, it's kind of uncomfortable and it's kind of hard. And oh, guess what? It's not just for this next minute. You kind of have to sustain it for the rest of your life. That right there is where the wheels fall off tremendously, if I'm being transparent. And I think when you keep saying, and everyone keeps saying, like, we've been doing this for so many years, why is there no progress? Well, guess what? All the movement and change that we've seen just in people moving from job to job, there's a whole bunch of who moved my cheese mindset, meaning like when there's change in, for those of you that even know what that book is, I don't even know why I said that, that totally aged me, but the whole concept of when change happens, how does someone react to it? So every single person here, we're in the midst of COVID. COVID is not just affecting people's personal life and their health, but it affects our actual economy, in the sense that, the airline industry, decimation. You could just go down the list of all these different groups that are being completely affected. So then diversity, there's passion around it, but then I'm scared. I'm in survival mode as a family. I've got COVID. I got my kid I'm working at home with, like all these, I've got my parents in elder care. All of these things are competing for mind share and heart share. And so it can be really difficult for me as a leader, and I'm imagining for my peers here, to kind of figure out a graceful way to insert yourself, but to keep the pressure on so that people understand it's not a one and done activity. It isn't, I attended an ERG event and breaking your arm to kind of pat yourself on the back on the work you've done there. Yes, great, good job. Now I need 100,000 more of those types of tasks culminated to drive the change we want to see. And you say a number like that, people's eyes glaze over and they freak out and say, how are we going to do that? Like, that's so hard. And, driving change that's basically fighting systemic years of discrimination and racism for, centuries, it's going to be hard. And we have to kind of be comfortable with that. And it's not an easy thing to kind of put to someone. When you explain it to them in its rawness, they're like, oh, okay. And then you kind of see people kind of start to fade back and be like, I hope she doesn't pick on me again, because I don't want to do it. But they don't want to tell you they don't want to. But sorry if I was being a little overly transparent, but those are some of the things that I see kind of pop up and happen.
Yeah, Ingrid, on your point about discomfort, I probably never saw it more prevalent as I did with the killing of George Floyd. People in the workplace being very well intentioned, but not really knowing if they were going to step into a very uncomfortable place for themselves. And getting comfortable with discomfort is really what this is all about. And I think the hard part about this for us and the work that we do is because we're working in an environment where people have habituated themselves to not being discomforted, to putting on armor to appear strong. So, in the workplace, we're kind of encouraging people to go to a place that they have created habits around, and it's in this space that they need to break those habits.
That's awesome.
I
I
think-
just want to kind of like sorry, Vanessa.
Yeah, no, just to build on that really quickly, I think one thing that can be helpful with that discomfort is examining the why behind it, right? I think we're so used to, well, this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation and let's just lean into it or walk boldly towards it, without actually peeling back that onion and examining, well, why is that so uncomfortable for you? Why haven't you had this conversation before? Have you talked to your kids about this topic? Why haven't you? How is it possible that you've been able to walk through the world for the amount of time and the many years that you've walked through the world without having to face this conversation that makes it that much more uncomfortable for you now? And I think once you start to peel back some of those layers for people, they realize that this isn't something to get defensive about. This goes back to the equity conversation. This goes back to the way in which the system is organized and designed to ensure that these conversations aren't happening. So sometimes meeting people where they are isn't just seeing where they're at in their journey and how can you get them a little further. It's actually giving them a space to examine why you have to meet them there in the first place. And then them coming to the realization of, okay, I have some work to do. And the meeting of them there is helping them to see how to do that work and where to start and what they can actually do to affect change, whether it's in the workplace or their personal life.
Vanessa, adding to that, completely agree. I think there's a key element, at least from my sense. In the beginning, I'd mentioned this humbleness of learning new things all the time. One of the things I always remind myself, because sometimes I think that Caucasian, heterosexual, able-bodied, over 6 foot, Christian men feel very much like there's a target on their back. And I try my best to remember, Ingrid, where are my spots of privilege? Meaning, I am able-bodied. I identify as someone who is heterosexual. There are many things in society that I can walk through freely and I don't have to make adjustments. I'm right-handed. Simple things like that, but the world is built for me. I have a socioeconomic space where I don't have to worry about. The second we moved to COVID work from home, that's fine. I was able to go find an office, like do everything. All of those things are privilege. And so whenever I kind of start to be like, oh my gosh, how could you be blind to this? I'm like, wait a minute, Ingrid, hold on, girlfriend. You're blind to, let's go down the list. Like I'm not thinking about how am I going to pay, my mortgage or this or my car note or my kids need their, like all those things that I don't have to put at the top of my mind to think about. It always kind of brings me back to whenever I get on my high horse, which can be easy to do, I kind of take myself a few pegs down quite quickly when I remember there's so many things that I really take for granted, and I'm moving through the world with those same blinders on. So please give grace to those who are also doing the same thing and try my best to help them become more aware and to keep my eyes open and my ears open to listening for those moments when, like Guy said, you're on the train and you go, I'm going to go this way. And it's like, oh, wait, I just did what I coach everybody else to do. And I love your transparency and vulnerability of sharing that. So others feel free to weigh in on that.
So I just want to jump in and encourage everybody to type your questions into the Q&A. For example, we have a question for you, Guy, about your golf experience in a minute. So just please start typing. This is really, really great conversation. By the way, you guys just naturally answered the next question I was going to ask, which is, as leaders of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, how do you live? How do you walk the walk? I think you gave us the answer, which is start with yourself, right? Or just kind of recognize where it is that you yourself, we are all like privileged. I'm female. I have, I'm able-bodied. I'm right-handed. Like I have tons of privilege. I don't need to go out on the street and worry about my own safety, right? That is not what I can say about some of my friends. So we all can kind of afford to be very aware. What do we have that is privilege? Now, you all mentioned about safety, right? Again, this is a highly uncomfortable subject. And a lot of times you would actually be in a position where you notice somebody who is relatively a powerful person doing something that they need to be talked to, right? So just an example, right? So let's say you've got kind of a, a traditional, boss type saying something that under most interpretations would come across as being sexist, right? So maybe they say, well, people think that you're my daughter because, I've had all sorts of things said to me because women in robotics. What are some best practices in terms of how do you, as the person who experienced that, to bring it up to the other person who is the instigator in a way that doesn't kill off the message because they were so busy being mad at you for bringing it up to them? So how do you make it safe? How do you make it professional? And how do you make it so they hear the message and have the opportunity to change?
Yeah, I can jump on that point. Elaine, also a little bit on your last point as well. I think we don't do a good enough job of really examining our failure and understanding why it's part of the learning process. I think when it comes to a lot of our DI&B initiatives, and like we said, this is a journey and everybody is at different parts of that journey, on different phases, on different levels of that journey. And I think sometimes we need to fail forward and we need to get vulnerable with the fact that like anybody can make a mistake. And I think if we can really lead with that vulnerability on our teams and as leaders in this space, it gives folks the understanding and the grace to say, okay, if leaders in this space can also feel like they can fail at this, I feel like I can fail and learn from that failure. So I think that's something that we're trying to create a more open environment around so that people feel like they can share those things like Guy shared, and then be able to also understand that everybody has biases. Like if you have a brain, you have a bias. So why not, be able to call those things out and really understand and examine why they happened in the first place. But I do think that when it really does come to like the best practices of this and being able to really speak with leaders, I think you really want to be able to, and this is from my perspective, diffusing the situation in a way that doesn't off-put the person that is in that current situation, so that we can make it a teachable moment. I think sometimes there are situations where it's a little fight or flight and it can get a little dicey. And I think especially in the workplace, it's difficult to navigate and understand, is this something I should bring up now? Should I pound my fist? Should I make us think about this right here, right now? And I think we fight internally about that. But I feel like for me, and things that have worked really well is really being able to collect my thoughts, assume best intent, and then also be able to have a really open conversation with that person around the intent or the impact that they had on another person, because intent just doesn't always equal impact. And so I think being able to create those teachable moments, but also be able to better understand where that person was coming from before I assume and place my biases on them has always worked well for me.
Do you think it makes a difference whether or not you're approaching the instigator as a leader or as an individual? So let's say I'm 3 years out of school, I'm working at iRobot, or it's always robotics, and someone says something inappropriate, and I'm feeling relatively 3 years out of school. Do I approach bringing up this topic a different way? Do I advocate for myself a different way than if I see myself as a leader?
I feel strongly about the response that I'm about to give. I think that you have to really address these things in the moment. Even when you're talking to a leader and this thing is happening publicly in front of others who respect this person, and the perception of leadership is so important to folks' reason for staying at a company. And so I really think that if you are regardless of your tenure at the organization and your experience, you're calling yourself an ally, you have to be willing to we would hope that the organization is not going to penalize you for standing up, but you have to be willing to do the unpopular thing and have a target on your back, and like Ingrid said, we're undoing hundreds of years of, of systemic oppression. And so this is going to be lifelong work. And so in the early stages of this, someone has to kind of take the heat. And so I really feel strongly that, it's not like go call your HR person. I think us as individuals, no matter who we are in the organization, really have to step up.
Mm-hmm. So step up in the moment, make it safe for the other person. How do you do that in front of a crowd? Or do you take them aside afterwards? Like, so we're getting kind of like practical recipes for the next time some funky thing gets said, right?
So let me say, I'm a leader, so it's going to show up differently for me. But, I was shaking in my boots one day when a leader we were in a Zoom meeting and there was a chat conversation happening, and they started talking about making fun of a guy with flowers on his shirt and joking about what section of the store he might have gotten it. And, a leader was egging this conversation on. And I was like, this is going wrong. No one's saying anything. Like, there's no way I'm not saying something, because I'm going to be so upset with myself if I don't. I have to act here. And so I just simply said, I think we should change the subject. And I was physically shaking because, this is a leader in the organization, and, I've seen this happen before, and like, I haven't seen anyone retaliated against, but I just knew, that, it could work against me. And so I think that wording, wasn't like, you're a bad person, or, or saying, that's homophobic, or, gender discriminatory. I just said, let's change subject. And I think, if we can quickly come up with responses like that, I think that's, one direction.
I love
Kiera,
that bystander mindset. That's the way to kind of think about it. And it's almost like you want to have a few Post-it notes kind of up on your board. Some
we need an FAQ.
Pivot. Yeah, some quick pivot things. I think what you said, change the subject. Sometimes if it's a small group, you could say ouch, or wow, that's interesting. What makes you say that? There's a whole kind of like a list of idioms or polite ways to kind of diffuse pretty quickly. And I think the one you just described is great. Guy, or others, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, just from a practical takeaway.
I'm so glad that was your response, Kiera. I think it's so important when people are serving as an upstander that they separate behavior from identity. You're not a bad person, you're a good person, you just happen to say something that was not ideal or appropriate. And Elaine, to your question a little earlier, do you pull somebody aside? Do you say it in public? I am such a strong proponent of having these conversations or these comments in public. You set a pattern of behavior that way. You set guardrails, what's acceptable and what's not, probably followed up by a one-on-one to go a little deeper. But those opportunities, those moments where you can set team guardrails is so important.
I totally agree. I do agree that doing this in a public setting is incredibly important. I just don't think everyone has the comfort level at that, or either at their organization or with the power dynamics going on in the moment. And it's hard to think on your feet. It takes practice. It takes time to really feel comfortable enough to be that person and to not, overreact with emotion. I am definitely one of those people that needs to take a minute, think about it, take a deep breath, and not really just jump right in and hopefully not offend the other person. But I agree, Kiera and Guy, especially with your sentiments around kind of understanding how to diffuse that conversation. And I think something that's always really worked well for me is the what do you mean by that, or being able to take this side of the person that is being that is really having the brunt of that issue come at them in that moment. So I think being able to support that person as opposed to directing the attention to the person that's done something wrong has always been a way to just ensure that person doesn't feel incredibly othered and continues to feel othered other people are starting to have this conversation outside of what has just taken place. And so I think that has been something that's been helpful. And then also a lot of our meetings, especially as they pertain around diversity, inclusion, and belonging topics, or other meetings in general, we try to create community norms and guidelines and run through those in the meeting. Like, just say, like, here are the things that we're just not going to tolerate. After the murder of George Floyd, we had a really big community check-in. We had about 600 people on Zoom, and it was things could have gone in any direction. Nobody knows what's going to happen when you get on Zoom. And I think emotions were raw, and people were really trying to be there to support, but also understand. And I think being able to have those guidelines up front, so people just knew, here are the facts, and here's what our leaders are really tracking towards. It's just a really nice way to kind of level the expectation of what should happen in these types of settings.
Perfect. So what we're hearing is if someone says something to you, do what you can to say something non-denominational in the moment, like something that's relatively safe but marks the moment, and do it in public, and go offline and have a deeper conversation. If you're a bystander, double down on that, because it's going to be, you would have less emotional cost to say that thing in public, and you probably are, less amped up in terms of that. And it doesn't matter who you are in the organization. So that's really, really awesome. So I just want to be sensitive to the time. We have a bunch of great questions. So I'm going to just switch to the Q&A from the audience. And as promised, Sophie asked, Guy, can you talk to the experience of the goth person on the subway car? Did they see you do that? And did they look mad?
I don't think he did see me and didn't know what was going on in my mind, but I will say that I felt a sense of remorse for myself. And, as I was walking off the platform, I almost, revisited how that would have played out a different way. But I don't think he had awareness.
Well, okay. I guess you got lucky. So this question is for Kiera. A Tufts alumni says, thank you for sharing your story. She is also a woman of color entering the tech industry, and she would love to hear a little bit more about your experience at the tech companies you were at, and what advice do you have for women of color when it comes to negotiating? So now we're talking about the job seeker perspective. You're going in, how do I negotiate? How do I tell if this company has, good culture, good policy in place for diversity and inclusion? How do I negotiate?
Yeah, I will say to expect to be, one of few or maybe the only, and, having that in mind, hopefully will, kind of give you a little bit of a buffer for what the experience could be, and I think, if you are entering an organization, well, hopefully, when you enter the organization, you've asked the right questions to kind of know that, they are on, an inclusive journey, so that, you feel that sense of belonging. And I think when selecting an organization, not getting blindsided by, the pretty things that their website says, and really asking for facts, asking to maybe in your interview process to, speak to people who you identify with to see what their actual experience is in the organization. I think that's, one way to make sure that you're making the right choice there. With regards to negotiation, that's a hard one for me. I think I struggle, to be confident and, being able to articulate, my worth when it comes to, what an organization is willing to offer for the experience and for what I bring. And I think that's going to be a lifelong struggle, as a marginalized person. But I would say, ask for help as much as you can, and maybe even be transparent about that. Like, I think, we kind of go along with, what recruiters are, the process that they're sharing. I think you can ask for transparency and it might catch them off guard, and you might get, the answer that you're looking for versus just kind of going along through the motions. And so, I'm not, I don't have, specific negotiation tactics, but, one thing that I have done is try to ask that, that question, and not even just about salary, but just about, what your expectations are, for being an employee, would be, and benefiting you. But asking it before, they tell you, so instead of, waiting for them to say, like, here's what we're offering, say, here's what I need, to support myself. And I've done that as far as, personal time. Like I see a therapist during the workday, and that's something that I made clear, before going in, so that, it wasn't looked as, me, wasting work time, when I needed to do that during the workday. So, yeah, and I will say too, as a Black woman, or anyone who identifies as, marginalized person, in this audience is, it's so important to really unapologetically be yourself, because we're spending a lot of time, doing the emotional labor to accommodate what the rules are, and the rules are, they're based on, white supremacy. And so, be unapologetically yourself and show who you are. It could be because there's someone else watching behind you who, is going to be looking to join that organization, and need an example of what success looks like. So yeah, that's my response.
That's
Super
awesome.
quick, from negotiating, be prepared. I had like a mini script. Exactly. Ingrid says, might say 3 answers. What happens if this? I wrote out everything because in that moment, your inclination is to be like, yes, I'll take it. And so it helped me. And then I wrote in big bold letters, be comfortable with silence, shut the bleep up. And I told myself, like, let silence sit there because silence is the most, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most powerful negotiating tools you can have. And that uncomfort, it's almost like who's going to, and I hate to be so gamification of it, but it's so key in helping women, other marginalized individuals be able to speak about their value, their worth, and to get paid. I mean, every single time since my daughter's been little, I give her, extra percentage of money, like change, because I always say to myself, and I tell her, when she was 6 years old, I'm like, you will be paid 51 cents on the dollar compared to a man. Here's an extra bit of my change that I give. Now, of course, she has no idea what I'm talking about, but to me, I always remember that's kind of what it takes. And you need to be advocating for yourself. So at least maybe it's 85 cents to the dollar, but more than likely, you're not going to be the highest paid person on that team. So get it in the front end because it'll be hard pressed through, all kinds of other salary compression things to get it later. So just do a little due diligence, Glassdoor research, write out your script. It sounds like a bunch of extra, but how mad would you be if you could have got $6,000, $5,000, $10,000 more by doing that little bit extra and getting comfortable with, hey, just like you said, Kiera, this is what I'm comfortable with. They can't ask in Massachusetts what your salary is anymore. So be prepared, because usually recruiters will ask you in the very first interview, so let's talk about compensation. And most people are like, oh my God, I'm not prepared. And then they just blurt out. And I'm like, you wasted, you could have had them, And so I always try to get people to be mindful, to be planful, and it usually will benefit them greatly.
You don't need to tell them, right? They ask you, what is your expectation of salary? You can say, well, what are you, you don't need to answer every question they pose you. You can always say, I can get back to you. I'm thinking about blah, right? Always do your research. Anyway, so we can go on for hours about negotiation, but we have a really great question here. We have a first-gen freshman who has a question for any Black woman. She is, how do you persevere through fields where you feel like you don't belong? I'm a first-gen freshman who wants to get into STEM, but I can't get rid of this feeling like I'm not prepared enough. First of all, you are prepared enough, so get over it already. But please, the question is for any Black woman.
Yeah, I can absolutely jump in. So I think there's sometimes this notion, and it's definitely something that I felt entering my career, that I need to work 10 times harder and be 100 times better than anyone else in the room in order to be seen, in order to do my job well, and to really, I think, excel and make it to the next level. And that can be exhausting. I think something that I wish I had done earlier on was really ask for more clear-cut expectations as to what is being asked of me, so that I could meet and or exceed those expectations with really concrete evidence, as opposed to thinking that I needed to do something else because it would help me stand out, or take on that extra project to help my coworker because they needed it. And you just get stretched too thin. And I think sometimes that can lead to you feeling like you not only are the only one maybe working so hard and not feeling like you belong in that space, but I think the sense of belonging that I was able to get once I felt more secure in the role that I had was really understanding like what I was there to do, and what my purpose was, and the value that I brought to that organization. So it was less about, sometimes it was me being the only one in the room, but at least I knew what my purpose was and what I could really focus in on, and what I needed to not only get done on a day-to-day, but also get better at. There are so many opportunities and areas for growth as well. And I think just balancing those as well will hopefully help with that sense of belonging also.
Anyone else want to add? Kiera?
As the other Black woman, I will add that connection is really important. You have to find, you can't be by yourself on an island experiencing that. It's just not it's not sustainable. So, find your people within the organization, and, everyone has, it's hard when you're dealing with things that, a difficult manager or, a colleague, and you don't want to talk negatively about them, but everyone has that person on the inside who they tell everything to. You need to find that person. And I would say, if it's more than one, even better. But, find that and also be that for someone else. And I think that's, one of the keys to feeling a sense of belonging.
I'll close out by just saying, treat yourself like you would talk to, a young 7 or 8 year old child who was out there, and she came back and said, I can't do it. Nobody wants me. But you would give them so much encouragement and so much like affirmation. I think treat yourself with that same kind of kindness. And I'm all about building plans. I don't know why. I just think, because I feel like there's a sense of direction and control. Maybe I'm a bit of a control freak. We'll talk about that later. But my thought process is, think about what it is you're trying to achieve. Think about where you feel like your assets and gaps are. I wouldn't spend an inordinate amount of time, to your point, trying to be the best because you feel like you're not enough. If you want to be the best because you want to be the best, do it. But don't try to kill yourself trying to be this invisible super person that you think you need to be in order to meet the minimum thresholds. It's I think, to Ashley's point, it's a never ending quest, and I think it just leads to exhaustion and some form of madness that I don't know what's in what book, but I'm sure it does. So, take care of your own mental health, find those resources. I am very, very intentional about building an external network, not just from the people in my firm. If for those people that are on this call that are introverts, I am a card carrying extrovert. So take this with a grain of salt, but really work hard to build that network, even if it's with other introverts, learning those key skills, learning to kind of give you almost like a peer mentorship sometimes if you need that. But having a safe space, I think, as Kiera said, to talk to someone, to have as a confidant, just to kind of validate you're not cuckoo. Sometimes when things are happening, that's good. But the other element is to help you figure out, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And if you're newly entering into the market, get into STEM, kick butt, take names, like do it. Because I'll tell you, we need that brain power you're bringing. We need that different dimension, not just because of your ethnic or gender diversity, but the way you think, your experience. That's going to add value to any team, and they'd be lucky to have you. But you got to believe you have a right to be there. And when you're there, own it. and then hopefully find 2 or 3 or 17 other of your closest friends who look like you, and bring them to the team. That's about that chipping away, trying to get at this this mega problem, one bite at a time, I guess, the elephant adage. So I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful.
And whoever you are out there, you need to know you are awesome, you are wonderful, you are super prepared. And the next time you want to ask, am I prepared? Just try to imagine somebody in the mainstream, and would they ask themselves that same question, am I prepared enough? And if the answer is no, then you need to turn around and give yourself a very big pep talk. So there's a question that's going likely to get me really angry. So someone says, several years ago, they asked their 12-year-old daughter if they would like to attend a summer course in robotics. She said yes, and then she ended up finding out there's 85% boys. And that was a turnoff. And percentage of women in engineering is really small. So what can we do to change the stats? So yeah, I'm going to shut up now, or I'm going to get really angry here. So what can we do? What are we doing? What can we as individuals do?
I think when it comes to especially youth, and I'm going to put it right out there, probably not the best person given that I don't have an 8-year-old child or anything like that. But I do, talk with my nieces and nephews about this all the time. And they're like 6 and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to go play. But every opportunity that I have to reinforce, yes, you're pretty, but you're smart. Or to my nephews, yes, you're strong, but you're also kind, and I think it's those little things along the way. And when it starts to build to this, well, this is for boys and this is for girls, it's just kind of having those conversations. And again, not unlike our leaders, right? It's meeting them where they are. Why do you feel that way? Why do you think that, boys can do things that girls can't do? Or why do you think girls should wear things that boys can't wear? And I think it's just kind of, the more we challenge those beliefs generally, regardless of age, I think how you do it is different, based on age, leveling, hierarchy, all of those things, leadership that come into it. But the more we can kind of create this environment where it's natural to challenge that and have these conversations and be more transparent about what you believe and what you think is maybe flawed in that type of design of the structure, the better off we're going to be down the road. I think, by the time you get into an organization, so many of those beliefs are really rooted, and to Kiera's point earlier and Ingrid's point, we're dismantling years and years and generations and generations and centuries of these belief systems. So the more we can start doing that with, kids in schools or the kids in our families, the more prepared we are to have them enter a workforce that looks more like what we're driving towards. And I think it is a long game, right? I don't think that there's anything that's going to flip a switch and be done with it. And it's incredibly frustrating to see these like one-off instances, but maybe there are other avenues that a young girl would feel more comfortable in, like a Girls Who Code or a Black Girls Who Code or something along those lines as that first step, and then bring them back into that room where it's 85% boys, where they already have a few skills under their belt. So they have that confidence, right? Where they can say, yes, not only has somebody told me I can do this, but I've done it before. I know I can do it. And I'm going to show those boys, right? And there's a certain amount of power also in having our young soon to be men one day seeing women within their contexts as well. I think it's just as important for the boys to see it as it is for the girls.
Anyone else has anything to add to that? That was awesome. All right, so next question. A faculty member says they do a lot of leadership testing, feedback coaching in their engineering leadership classes. Invariably, the women students that they test rate themselves as a leader significantly lower than their direct reports, peers, and bosses. when asked why they don't see themselves as others do, they all kind of come down to a lack of confidence. So now this is like, not only do the women rate themselves lower than the men, they rate themselves lower than everyone who knows them. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think this ties really heavily to imposter syndrome too. I think in some areas you feel like you don't belong because you're in maybe an AP course, or you just got promoted to a role that you've never done before, or you're transitioning from a career in like one field to another. And I think this imposter syndrome like seeps in, and it definitely did for me when I moved from e-commerce retail to a role in diversity and inclusion. While it was something that I was very familiar with talking about from my own perspective, it was very different, being able to articulate that and build programs and resources and support for other people, and making sure that they felt like that they belong. So I think when it came to just the rating of like, did I do this well? We're always tougher on ourselves. And I think I've seen this as a gendered issue for a while, is that there's always an additional like hill to get over. There's always, one piece of feedback where you're like, well, I didn't get that one piece of it, and I didn't accomplish that thing. So therefore I didn't quite get to the level that I needed to get to. And so I've definitely seen that myself, where sometimes, I try something new, I get about 85% of the way there, but I didn't get that 100%. So for me, when you look back on it and you think, did I do everything I could have done, or did I do it as well as I could have? That imposter syndrome, I think, starts to set in, and it is difficult to shake. But I really like to think a lot about Issa Rae's moments in Insecure, where she's looking at herself in the mirror and talking out loud about how incredible that she is. I think we don't do that enough for ourselves. I think we need to talk to ourselves before we hear what everybody else thinks of us too, because sometimes that can be conflicting. And so I've really started to try and to write down some of the things that I know that I'm good at, and not say, I think I'm good at this thing, and say, I know I'm good at this thing, or I am a leader in this thing. And it's really helped reframe how I see myself and how I can better evaluate myself moving forward.
I feel like we all need to do some Amy Cuddy right here, like
I was just about to say the perfect book to address everything that Ashley just said. If you're interested, is her book Presence. Hugely helpful for me in tackling imposter syndrome. So I mean, I think it's always an ongoing, lifelong journey in that. But that's one resource. I think it's helpful.
Yeah. So we have a ton more really great questions. Let's see how many we can answer by talking super quickly, like New Yorkers. So we have a question from Riva about, how do you build connections when you don't have any? You're coming from a low income background, they feel like they don't have a network they can build upon like their peers through their early education, family, etc. How do you build a network from nothing?
Connect to those peers. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. Connect to the people who you say you don't have connections with, and try to be intentional. Quick coffees, quick boba teas, or whatever the kids are drinking now, and try to make those quick ones with the people who do have connections. And then hopefully, as you actually build real authentic relationship with them, they will introduce you to some of those people. That's a great lift off to get you started. And then go to actual networking events, be intentional, try to connect with people. I always tell young people when they meet me, they say, oh, Ingrid, I'd love to get coffee with you. And I say, I won't remember this moment, but if you were serious about it, here's my contact information, send me something, and make sure you put in the header. I tell them all the things. Those people that connect with me, I make time for them because they had the courage and they followed through. For the other folks, it's just blah, blah, blah. But I would say, go ahead and connect with those folks, either via LinkedIn or whatever your social media of choice is.
Okay, next question. Lightning round. The journey to dismantle the systemic inequities are long. How do we keep maintain focus over time? Maybe Guy, you can kind of answer to that, because like you had you've seen a bunch of huge companies. So what does the long view look like?
What does the what look like?
Long view. How do you keep the momentum over a long time? Because it's easy for leaders to feel like they've accomplished more than they have, right? How do you support this over time?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about systemic change, right? This is I think about this just like exercising, right? New Year's Day rolls around. We all think it's a great idea. We make a commitment to ourselves. We might go to the gym once or twice, and then you fall off, right? So everybody thinks it's a great idea, but it takes habit. It takes tenacity. The work that we do in DE&I is very effortful, and it requires creating a movement. So from a company perspective, to support continued evolution, continued change, it takes a lot of work, and it has to happen from the top.
Cool.
I'm just going to add that rest is also part of that movement. You have to take rest. You have to do it. You got to recharge your battery.
Yeah.
Yes. Take care of yourself. Okay. So there's a cluster of 3 questions that are vaguely related. It all has to do with Kiera's let's change the subject. So the first question is like, well, if we just kind of call it out in the moment, do they learn anything? And then what are some other catchphrases that we can use? And what do you do when people actually don't follow rules? Like if you have community norms and you're not to say this and you're not to do that and you catch someone doing it. So I think that's kind of related. So what are some ways to kind of be effective there?
To answer the first question, I think people do learn and you might not see it, but they'll, I think when people are kind of shamed in public, if it's not intentional, even if it's not intentional, it's kind of hard, it sticks with you. And, others are watching and also, kind of recognizing what could happen in a public setting when they're being held accountable. Other catchphrases, I think there's a, not so that we don't take too much time, there's a lot of advice out there. And I think if you, just did some research in Google, how to be an upstander, how to be an ally in the moment, there's a lot of tips for, what you can do. And I loved Ingrid's suggestion of like having Post-its up there. I mean, this stuff happens on a daily basis. You will use those Post-its. So just set it up. Especially if you know the type of microaggressions that come up, have a women's section and have like a Black employee section, just, be prepared and keep, intentionally practicing, so that you can, build that muscle for yourself.
Perfect. So watching the time, we have 2 minutes left. I could stay here for another hour, but we do want to end on time. So I'd like to invite all of our panelists to give like a 15-second soundbite. What is one thing you would suggest that we take away from this conversation? One thing we can do, anything.
To follow what Ashley said earlier about rest, I think that we're all trying to do so much in this space right now. Find your lane, find the one thing to focus on, do that really well, and then move on to the next. Don't try to tackle every, type of systemic issue because, it needs to be sustainable.
I'm just going to piggyback because that is exactly what I was going to say, but don't boil the ocean. Try and influence your tiny corner of the world and you will make incremental change over time.
Guy?
Yeah, I would say ask for help. Ask yourself how you feel when somebody asks you for help and you provide it. You feel good about yourself. So if you don't ask for help, you're robbing somebody of the opportunity to feel good about themselves.
Perfect. Vanessa?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question about the long game and sustainability. Consider accountability, right? So whether it's you've set a goal for yourself on your own journey for, how you're going to influence your family or community, things that you're going to do in the workplace, create those milestones and consider what accountability looks like. Maybe it's getting a buddy involved and things like that. This is a long game and it's a lot of work, to Guy's point, that it's, something that requires resilience, and I think beautifully said, requires rest and recharging batteries, and in a lot of cases work with my own therapist and things like that. So building those considerations in, using Ingrid's method of that roadmap, I think will go a really long way for people.
And I would just say, use data, it's your friend, make things irrefutable. And then that way you can build on a plan forward. I am a huge proponent of walking into a conversation. Storytelling is very essential. It moves hearts and minds, but the data is that backup that says, here's where we're going to drive action. I think Vanessa's points on accountability are key. Building that into what people are supposed to be doing, I think, is a part of, and give them the actual hows and the tactics, and then say, I'm circling back with you at yada yada date with this expectation, this be done. I think there's always this, we hope everyone gets along and works together, and now we're closing, namaste. Like, that is wonderful, but at the end of the day, people are like, well, I was interested in doing something, but I don't know what to do. Kind of back to Guy's thing with the exercise. If you can walk somebody to the gym, that's like one part of the battle. Getting them on the machine and standing them next to it without telling them how to use it. What's the expectation? You're going to feel this might happen. And then when you get off tomorrow, don't eat a bucket of wings and, a two-layer cake. That might not be helping you get to success. Instead, here's some carrots. Do this. Like, you don't have to make it super prescriptive depending on where the person is, but you got to give people the to-do and the expectation on what success looks like, and a timeline. All of those things are key in order to really help this long gain advance, or else we're going to be always on a trajectory where the increase is so slow you could barely tell the slope. I want to live in a world where we're doing that kind of increase. So
perfect. Well, a great conversation. The one thing I take away is we are not powerless. We are powerful. We have the power to change the world through our own actions. Thank you so much. And that's a wrap. Thank you for coming.